Hi, everyone, and welcome to Live with the 19th. I'm Erin Haynes, editor-at-large for the 19th, which is an independent nonprofit newsroom that aims to empower you with the information, resources, and community that you need to be equal participants in our democracy. In the United States, more than half of all incarcerated people are parents, meaning that the prison system punishes their families too. The prison system separates loved ones from their families, breaks down support systems, and destabilizes whole communities, particularly communities of color. Visitation hours are severely limited. Phone calls can be prohibitively expensive. And on top of all of this, families of incarcerated people often cope with social stigma, economic insecurity, and long periods of separation. Today, we are having a critical conversation on the impact of mass incarceration on families, with the people who've navigated the criminal justice system as parents, children, and lawyers. Before we get started, we'd like to thank our sponsor, the Just Trust. Ana Zamora, founder and executive director of the Just Trust, will share a few words.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ana Zamora. I'm the founder and executive director of the Just Trust and proud sponsor of this conversation with the 19th. I'm thrilled to be with you today, even though we're still virtual. And I'm so grateful to each of the speakers and attendees who have taken time out of their busy day to have a critical but often overlooked conversation about the impact that mass incarceration has on American families and communities. Recent studies show that 1 in 2 adults in this country have an immediate family member who was or is incarcerated. I know because I'm one of those people who knows firsthand what it means for a loved one to be lifted out of their life and locked away. Think about that for a minute. 1 in 2 adults. That means in all likelihood, a good number of people listening in today know someone that has been impacted by the justice system. This isn't just a some of us issue. This is an all of us issue. I could go on all day about the way our society uses punishment and incapacitation as a Band-Aid for deep societal and cultural issues. I could also go on all day about the rationale for building a more dignified, humane, compassionate, and frankly, much smaller engine of justice in this country, one that actually focuses on healing and community safety. But I will save that conversation for another day. We absolutely have to talk about how we got here, and we absolutely have to talk about where we're going. But we also have to pause for a moment and recognize the immense trauma and suffering experienced by the friends, families, and communities of those whose loved ones are system impacted. Kids without parents, parents without kids, people without neighbors, businesses without workers. And is it really making us safer? The group of people we punish, quite frankly, is much bigger than we let on. At the Just Trust, when we say we're working for a smaller criminal justice system, we mean shrinking the overall footprint of this complex, punitive system that has crept into every aspect of American life. Less people going into the system, more people treated with dignity within the system, less barriers for people when they come home, and less kids, parents, neighbors, and friends with a massive hole in the fabric of their lives. This is what we're here to acknowledge and talk about today, the ripple effect of mass incarceration. As for the Just Trust work in all of this, we are a brand new grant-making fund that is 100% dedicated to advancing criminal justice reform. We exist to help power advocacy work in every corner of this country, state by state, in all kinds of communities, with organizations of all sizes, and with partners working across the political spectrum. And if you're someone that's out there working to change things in your state or on the national scale, from organizers to policy wonks to storytellers, we want to hear from you. Please visit thejusttrust.org and drop us a line about what you're up to. And with that, I'll go ahead and pass the mic to our incredible lineup of speakers who each touch this issue in a different and important way. Thank you all once again for tuning in to talk about a thing we don't usually talk about. This is how change starts. Thank you.
A quick reminder that while sponsors help to keep Live with the 19th free for viewers to attend, they play no part in the programming of our events. As our conversation kicks off, we hope that you will share what resonates with you on social media. Just use the hashtag the19thlive. And if you're not yet subscribed to our free newsletter, please go to 19thnews.org/subscribe. You can find out about upcoming 19th News events, read stories, and more. Now, please meet the panel that I am delighted to speak with today. Brittany K. Barnett is an attorney, the founder of Girls Embracing Mothers, and the co-founder of the Buried Alive Project. Sylvia A. Harvey is an award-winning journalist and the author of The Shadow System, Mass Incarceration and the American Family. Sharonda Jones is an entrepreneur and the co-founder of the Buried Alive Project. After serving nearly 17 years of a life sentence for a first-time drug offense, Jones was granted clemency by President Barack Obama in late 2015. And Christina Swarns is executive director of the Innocence Project. Welcome, Christina. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm going to start by asking all of you really about a lesson learned that you would highlight from the pandemic about the existing inequality and the impact of mass incarceration on families, and why it really matters that we get to a new normal as a society around this issue now. Brittany, I'll start with you.
The pandemic has totally devastated people behind bars and their families. For over a year and a half now, many people behind bars have not seen or touched their loved ones. Visits have been disrupted, programming has been disrupted, and medical care has been negligent, to say the least.
Sylvia, what would you add to that?
Say that the pandemic has definitely put the level of inequality in our criminal legal system on Front Street. I think that a lot of people may have been aware of some of the things that were going on, or perhaps not a lot of people, but people that work directly with the system or people that are directly impacted. But I think that because the pandemic has been so devastating to people that are incarcerated, we've been able to see as a nation what's happening inside. We've been able to look at these close quarters that they're held in. We're able to look at how unsanitary it is, how they've been sort of left without any kind of protective equipment, and really just saw that these are people that we have literally disposed of as a country and have not thought more of. So it's like we didn't think of them until we started to consider what was happening inside the facilities in terms of how fast COVID was spreading, only because we thought about that coming outside the facilities. Oh, what happens to the people that are working inside these systems? What happens to the guards? What happens to everyone inside that system that's coming back out to the community? So with this fear that, oh, we're sort of, infecting our community, and that's the only reason we should get, some kind of preventative measures inside the facility. So I think that, it was really problematic that we did not, as a nation, think about those that are inside as humans, as people that needed to have protection, that people that, were at risk even more from this pandemic. And I think that it just really, really highlighted the inequality in our system.
Sharonda, what would you say about that?
And as the numbers are going up, like being inside the system, like she was saying, everything is limited. So with that in mind, having your family or someone around to come visit, that kind of like ease the pain up a little bit, because you know that you're without. But stopping all of that, like no visitation and the guards coming in and out, that was like so touching to me, because I had some friends in there that had caught the COVID, and I understood, because you couldn't really check on them. You can't call, they're not gonna answer the phone every time you call to check on a loved one. And that's like just devastating, and it broke my heart.
Mm. And Christina, what about your work and how that was impacted by the pandemic?
One of the things that we saw during the pandemic was courts slowing down and not processing as many people into the system, right? Not processing for a period of time, the volume of people, not arraigning as many people, not sending as many people into jails and prisons in this country. And what that exposed, I think, really importantly, was, that you don't need to lock people up en masse for the purposes of public safety, right? When the courts slowed down because of the pandemic, we did not see a sudden, surge in violence across the country. And that's not a surprise to anyone on this panel, because we knew that the courts were locking people up unnecessarily, And that's really what was highlighted, I think, partly during the course of this pandemic, which is the way in which the system is just over incarcerating people in ways that are not absolutely unnecessary for public safety purposes. And so they're really the return, like the proposal that we now need to return to the way things were before is really, shown to be false by the fact that, while we were in the pandemic and while the courts did slow down and were not processing people in such volume, we didn't see sort of the surge in crime that prosecutors and police always suggest will happen if we don't lock people up en masse.
Well, Sylvia, I want to come to you next because, what is so great about the work that you're doing is that it comes from your own lived experience that has shaped the work that you do. That's something that we really think is so valuable at the 19th, because it makes for a more empathetic approach, frankly, to covering mass incarceration. Can you just tell the folks that are watching today a little bit about your experience, how it informs what you write about, what you mean by the shadow system, and why it's important? What is your advice for newsrooms that are covering mass incarceration and how they can do it better? What needs to change?
Yeah, so my father served 27 years in, various California prisons. And that started when I was 5. So I'm not going to date myself, but just think about 27 years of experience with our criminal legal system. For me, my personal experience really was a lens into all of the systems change work that needs to take place, right? So I recall a time when my father, I hadn't heard from him for maybe a week or 2 weeks. I was living with my grandmother, and he would generally call me at least twice a week. And he didn't call me. And when I was on the phone with him, when I finally spoke to him, I was furious. And he said to me today, he's like, you yelled at me like I just didn't love you. And I had to be maybe 8 years old at the time. And, he said, I'm going to write you. And he wrote me a letter every day for a month until I said, don't write me. It's too much. It's too much. I can't keep up with the letters. But the reason he wrote those letters and the reason I did not hear from him is because my grandmother's phone was, the collect calls were disconnected, right? She didn't have the money to pay for the exorbitant cost of these calls. And even today, you can still pay up to $25 for a 15-minute phone call, right? So having that experience of not being able to talk to my father, but then later being able to connect it to what's happening in terms of our system, right? That it's too expensive for him to call. He's too far away for me to go every week, right? The visits that we used to have that were family visits where I could stay with him the whole weekend were removed. All of these things that took place were at the systems level. So thinking about everything that has happened, right? From going to visit him and having, the guards make me undo my cornrows because they believed I had heroin tucked in them, to the search, to him not being able to walk past a red line toward the microwave in the visiting room, like all of that was just showing me what this system looks like, what it does, and what kind of things need to be revealed to the larger public. So all of my work sort of stems from what I've seen as a lived, a person that's been directly impacted and what needs to happen. So everything that I've written is about, 3 different parts of our system, right? So we're looking at our education system. So I'm looking at the school to prison pipeline. We're looking at our child welfare system. I'm looking at how, the Adoption and Safe Families Act, for example, really makes it difficult for parents to maintain custody of their children or to be reunited once they're released, right? And then really just looking at the criminal legal system itself and the sort of really, really unjust laws that we're dealing with, right? So if I'm thinking about 3 strikes and you're out, all of the sentencing. So it was just so much to cover that, I started doing these long form investigations that looked at each aspect of the system to show our readers something new, to show you what it means to be a person inside, to show you what it means to have somebody you love inside, and really just to show that mass incarceration isn't something that impacts one person. It impacts the entire family, it impacts the community, and it impacts us as a society. So my book, The Shadow System, Mass Incarceration in the American Family, is really a lens into all of these different issues that are happening that not everyone's aware of. So my hope is really that people pick up this book and they're able to learn more about what's happening to the people inside, the people that love them, and the communities that have supported them and want to continue supporting them.
Right. And that's so important. I mean, because at the end of the day, you are centering not the issue, but the people, right, and their humanity, bringing that back to, why this conversation is important, because there are real lives involved in this every single day. And sometimes that can get lost in kind of this broader conversation about systems that feels kind of abstract, particularly for people, like you said, who may not be impacted by this, who may not have a loved one that's incarcerated, and who may not have had any dealings with the criminal justice system themselves. Sharonda, I want to come to you because I want to ask you, we're talking about families and you were a mom in prison. I mean, how were you able to stay in touch and maintain a relationship with your children? And, since you have been out of prison, what has your time since 2015 looked like for you and your family?
She pointed out something very important, and that was like those visits and those calls. Like, we get 300 minutes a month, so I would use 10 minutes a day to connect and to keep the connection between my daughter and I. When I left, my daughter was 8, so that was very important to me. So just maintaining the mind and staying focused. Like, I took every free class that was offered in the prison system within my 16 years and 9 months. So it was very important that I communicate with my daughter every day so I could just see what level her thinking was on and where she was at within her school and the guidelines of the world itself today. And the pandemic, I know, has hurt a lot of families. Like, you can't get those calls, you can't get those visits. And I was released in 2015, true enough, but I came home to a brand new granddaughter. So I have a 5-year-old granddaughter now. So my life is full with my daughter and my granddaughter. So it's like I'm the perfect granny. And she say I'm the best granny in the world. However, me and my daughter are still trying to connect what we lost. Like, I know we can't get it back. We just every day work on what we can do to build a better relationship. Because when I got out, I didn't know her. After 17 years, I did not know her. She was 8 when I left. So I was still treating her like an 8-year-old. And I was having problems with that. And both of us would be calling Brittany in the middle of it, like what to do, because she was more than just an attorney to me. She became like a family friend. And in this case, she was like our counselor. So we needed that. And even today, it's still hard sometimes because she understands that I needed help in a lot of areas and she just didn't know how to connect. And the same with her. Like, I missed that. And I'm just trying to pick up the pieces now and just keep it moving forward.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And I bet you are a great grandmother.
She said, I'm the best.
Best grandmother, exactly. But listen, I mean, I hear you talking about Brittany it sounds like she was almost such a bridge and a lifeline for you. I want to talk about the two of you's relationship. Brittany, I want to come to you and just ask about how you and Sharonda connected, how you found out about her story, how you ended up working on her behalf to get her clemency from President Obama back in 2015. Tell me about that journey and tell me about the relationship that you two were able to establish as a result of that experience and the Buried Alive project.
I came across Sharonda Jones's case as a law student. I took a critical race theory course analyzing the intersection between race and the law. And I was going to write about the disparity in sentencing between powder cocaine and crack cocaine and this 100-to-1 sentencing disparity that it created. And what that meant was I could have 500 grams of powder cocaine, you could have 5 grams of crack cocaine, and we will receive the same sentence in prison. And it's not lost on anyone that more affluent white people were using powder cocaine in the late 80s and crack cocaine was running rampant through communities of color. So it led to this hugely disproportionate number of Black and brown people in federal prison for drugs. But I had experienced the incarceration of my own mother. So when my mother went to prison, it brought me very proximate to this issue of mass incarceration. And I understood this primal wound that comes with having an incarcerated parent. And so for my paper, I wanted to look beyond the numbers and show the heartbeats. I wanted to show the people who have been impacted by this 100-to-1 ratio. And I did a Google search one night in the law library, and Sharonda Jones's case popped up. And I saw so much of myself in her. She was also a Black daughter of the rural South like me, except that she was serving her 10th year at the time of a life without parole sentence for a federal drug offense. And I was in my second year of law school. And I remember when my mother was in prison, how important it was to get letters and cards. And so I wrote Sharonda a letter. I told her I was a law student, that I was going to practice corporate law, that I knew next to nothing about criminal law, but that I was going to help her get out of prison. And that formed a relationship from there. You know, she wrote me back very nonchalant, like, yeah, right. You know, like she wished me well in my studies, but it just began a beautiful friendship relationship. I would go visit her. I did go practice corporate law. So I would work, you know, closing deals by day and by night work pro bono, just trying to figure out a way to help free Sharonda. And I always say that I just became obsessed with her case. I fought for her life as if it were my own, because it was. And through that, after 6 years of working, trying to find a way, President Barack Obama graciously saved her life on December 18th, 2015. And I'm just so grateful. And from there, Sharonda Jones and Corey Jacobs, another client of mine who had life and received clemency from President Obama, we linked arms and we co-founded the Buried Alive Project to work to free people who were unjustly sentenced under these federal drug laws. And to date, we've helped free over 52 men and women, many of them set to die in federal prison for drugs.
Wow. Wow. I mean, I wonder if both of you can just take me back to December 18th, 2015, the day you got the call that when you found out that Sharonda was going to be released. Brittany, what was your reaction? Sharonda, what was your reaction? And I mean, because a 6-year journey, I'm sure you, when she first wrote you that letter, you couldn't have imagined that she was really going to make this happen for you and for your family.
Yeah, I was with my mom. Actually, my mom had been free, and I have an organization, Girls Embracing Mothers in Texas, for girls with moms in prison. And we were shopping for our Christmas event. And I got the call from the pardon attorney's office telling me that Sharonda Jones's clemency petition had been granted. And I pulled over, and my mom is screaming and crying. I'm screaming and crying. And we had a call set up. The pardon attorney's office said, you have to call Sharonda at this number at 1 p.m. And I was shaking. I'm looking for paper. I think I found the back of an envelope to write on, so I didn't miss any details. And at the time, Sharonda's daughter was pregnant, and there had been just a lot of uneasiness, anxiety about Sharonda being locked up and her daughter experiencing this pregnancy without her. And I just remember screaming when Sharonda got on the phone, "You're going home." And she started crying. And I just remember her saying, "I get to be there for the baby. I get to be there for the baby."
Yeah.
That'll make me tear up now.
Because I'm about to tear up right now.
It was something like the unit manager came down, and normally when they come down, it's a death or something big that happened. So he was like smiling, and he was like, "Don't go to lunch today." And I was like, "Why?" Because I never really go to lunch, but he was like, "Today, don't go to lunch for sure." So I was like, okay. He was like, "You know what this is about?" And I was like, "No," because normally it's a death or something when they come down and talk to you like that. So I went in the office, and Brittany was on the other end saying, "You free, you coming home." And I was like, "Why you didn't tell me?" I was so confused, like so many emotions. I was thanking God. I was praying. I was like, just tears rolling down, like I could not control it. And so a lot of the other inmates was looking in the window, because it was a glass window I was in. It was like, either somebody done died or she going home. So when I come out, I was like, I'm going home. And it was like a big celebration.
Wow, what a moment.
And even before then, I always felt like, I go home one day. I would always try to boost Brittany, saying, "I know you're working hard. I'm going home one day. I'm going to be on one of these lists. Maybe not today, but I'm going to be on one of these lists." So that day was like a celebration. And the staff, because I was basically a model inmate, so they kind of like worked extra because it was during the holidays to make sure that I was taken care of to be able to go to the halfway house.
Wow. What a moment. Thank y'all both.
It was a moment.
Thank y'all for sharing that. Christina, I want to come back to you because, you also do work on behalf of folks who are innocent to get them the day that Sharonda describes, right? Which is huge, but people who are in prison, who are wrongfully in prison, how is that different? How is the toll on families different, would you say?
Thank you for asking. I think that I'm not quite sure that the impact on those who have survived incarceration is super different. It's, there is untold trauma, right, for every single person that goes through the prison system in this country, regardless of whether or not they are guilty or whether they're innocent. The prison system in this country is broken in more ways than we can even begin to discuss here, right? It's substandard medical care. It is violent. It is the structures to deny people access to their family supports are too many to count. So when folks come home, right, there's a huge adjustment period from having endured really, really profound trauma. That trauma is, of course, absolutely magnified for those like my clients who are not guilty of the crime for which they have been convicted and sentenced to prison. Right, we have clients that my office has represented who have done decades in prison for a crime they didn't commit, and that just really amplifies and exaggerates the trauma that they have experienced from having gone through the system and having endured prison. Their families share it, right? Every person who is in prison is experiencing trauma along with the family that supports them. And that's no different for people who are innocent. We as an organization work really hard to support not just our clients, but also their family members with, providing, endless, really, we provide ongoing contact. Every call that comes in is accepted by the lawyer or one of our paralegals. And we spend time just talking to people, giving them a lifeline outside of the prison walls. We also have a social work team, working with our clients, both prior to their release and upon their release, to deal with sort of the effects of having been incarcerated wrongly and having had to endure the prison system. We have social workers working with folks because a lot of people don't even have family members, right? A lot of our clients don't have family members available to provide the kind of supports that we heard about today. Some are really alone. And so our team really works very hard to get folks housing, to get folks medical care, to get folks mental health care when they come home so that they have the opportunity to start their life anew and to start, honestly, the life they should have had in the case of wrongful conviction, but for, the errors committed by the state.
Christina, you brought up a word that Brittany also references when we're talking about people who are incarcerated, and that is the idea of surviving prison. Brittany, I want to come to you and ask you about why that language is important and what it is. What does it mean for families? How do they survive prison?
That's a great question. I use the term because I've lived it firsthand and the trauma that comes from incarceration. As Sylvia mentioned, when one person goes to prison, the entire family goes to prison. And that time that my mother was incarcerated was a period of survival mode for my sister and I. The people that we represent at the Buried Alive Project, similar to the Innocence Project, where they're serving life without parole sentences. And that is the second most severe penalty permitted by law in America. It screams a person is beyond hope, beyond redemption, and it suffocates mass potential, as it buries people alive. And to wake up every day facing a life without parole sentence, facing a fate that would be unbearable for many of us, that is survivorship. And that treasure chest of survivorship that we see with our clients, that I saw through Sharonda, it comes up and just reimagining hope every day, whether it was Sharonda's survivorship coming from hearing her daughter laugh on the other side of the phone, of being able to make her famous tamales that she would make inside prison for the women there. Those are all acts of survivorship that as a whole is the only way, to get through, is holding on to some conviction of hope.
Yeah. Yeah. Sylvia, you talk about in the shadow system, the 2.7 million American children who have an incarcerated parent. You talked about your own experience with your father. Can you talk about the impact of this on children? Not just in terms of their direct relationship with family, but how that just affects them trying to navigate life, the mental and emotional toll that can take on them overall.
Yeah, I always say that it's really important for us to, especially as directly impacted people, to talk about ourselves and our stories. And for me as a journalist, it's really important that I make sure people see far beyond like a single narrative. So even though I've had my own experiences as a young person, my sort of thinking around children comes from what I've seen, right? So I was in Mississippi once, and I was, I met a young girl there. I think she was 8. She had a t-shirt on. The t-shirt had all these faces of men that were in prison. And one of the men, it was a picture of her father, and she said that she was fighting for justice. So there she was, this 8-year-old in the park with her fist in the hands, and she, fist in the air, and she was like, I'm fighting for justice. I'm fighting for my dad to come home, for my uncle to come home. She started naming all these people that she'd already known that were incarcerated, her dad, her uncle, someone from her community. So I think that, in a space like that, she felt safe and she felt comfortable. But when she was at school, she didn't tell anyone that her father was in prison or her, uncle was in prison, because there's this level of shame that I don't want you to look at me differently. I don't want you to, say something that is untrue about me and where I come from, just because I have someone that is inside the system, right? So really just thinking about how children have to navigate in all these spaces. How do you navigate, at home when you're not able to connect with your parent? How do you navigate when you have to actually go inside a facility, And I feel like I've met so many young children that have this cognitive dissonance where they understand that they're going inside a prison to see their parent, but they won't say the word prison. They won't say that mommy or daddy is in jail, because it's not something that you want to admit to the world. You want to admit publicly because there's so much stigma associated with it. And I think that we need to do so much more work in terms of what we say about people that are incarcerated, right? What kind of conversations we're having. And this includes in schools, right? What kind of support system do these children have? How do we support them without alienating them? How do we give them what they need without, sort of making them out to be this dangerous, on their way to super predatorhood, thing. I think that it's all about how we perceive people, how we manage what we know and don't know. And I think that is a huge issue with how, as a society, we just are not informed of all the different things that young people have to navigate, and how we can be, as a country, in support of them, whether it's in school, whether it's in our neighborhoods. Everywhere there needs to be some space where we take a moment and we hold space for young people and ask them what they need, figure out where they want to go, instead of this assumption that, because they come from a place, that looks one way, or because they have a parent that's already been incarcerated, there's this assumption that is going to happen. I was on a show once, and a woman said to me, she said, this was the host, she said, have you or any of your brothers been incarcerated? And I said that, yeah, 2 of my brothers had been incarcerated. And she said that she was willing to bet that was the case. And she said it, in a way where she was implying that structural inequality and racism was something that you catch like a cold. Like somehow, because, we went to see my father inside a prison, we were going to be like that. My brothers were like that because of my father. No, my brothers had a run-in with the system because we don't value Black and brown life. That's why, right? Because we have all these stereotypes, and we have all this legislation that is embedded with inequality that perpetuates what's happening. So I think it's it's important to really step back and think about children as whole and human and in need of service, and people that have complicated feelings.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're raising such an important point. And Christina, I want to come to you on this because I think that there is a lot of empathy for people who are wrongfully imprisoned, right? I think that society has a lot of empathy for those folks, don't necessarily have the same empathy for the types of folks that Sylvia and Brittany and Sharonda are talking about. How do we change that conversation? How do we help people to remove that stigma so that children do not feel that shame and really have families that are isolated because they can't talk about their experience with their friends, their loved ones, their community.
I think it's such an important point. You know, the thing that the innocence cases do powerfully is that they shine a light on the way that the system is broken for everyone. In particular, right, one example of that is that they shine a light on the way that the system is structured to incentivize sort of the denial of the presumption of innocence. So, you know, let me give you a couple of examples. And when I mean incentivized, I'm really talking about laws and policies and practices. And that really, and I think it's important for folks to understand this, right? Because it goes to this perception of people who are in jail or prison, you know, rightly or wrongly, rightly air quotes, or wrongly, because it's really important. So for example, in this country, if you are charged with a crime, every single one of us, if we are charged with a crime, we will be presented at some point with one of two options. First, you know, and this is about the trial penalty. Let me just be clear to what I'm speaking about. There's a trial penalty in this country. So first, for example, even though we are told, you know, from when we were young, right, the Constitution in this country, right, the principles upon which our criminal legal system stand say that it's better for 10 guilty people to go free than one innocent person, right, to be found to go into the system. Really, the system is structured in exactly the opposite way. So if you are arrested, if you are charged with a crime, you'll be given two options. The first is which it says, oh, you are presumed innocent and you have the absolute right to hold the state to its burden of proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt at a trial. But if you do that, you risk, and you have to be clear, and you will be told this in no uncertain terms, you will risk an enormous amount of time. There is a tax on your exercise of the right to assert your innocence and to hold the state to its burden of proof, because if you are not found guilty, you are going to be sentenced to an enormous amount of time in prison. That's your first option. The second option you will be presented with is, but on the other hand, here we are before trial, you don't have to assert your presumption of innocence. You can plead guilty right now. And if you do, you can go home, right? You can go home now, you can go home in 5 days, you can go home in 10 days, you can go home in a much shorter period of time. This is a system, right? That's an example of how the system incentivizes, right? And is built to push people into the system itself, regardless of guilt or innocence, right? It is not upholding, it is not prioritizing the presumption of innocence, quite the opposite. It's prioritizing pushing people into the system. And so when you understand that, right, a rational decision under those circumstances is often to plead guilty, right? Is often to have a felony conviction. It is often the thing that any parent, any person with, you know, a family has to do, right? And then they are now deemed to be in the system and, judged exactly in the ways that were discussed, right? So that's a structural failure that we have, in our criminal legal system today. And that's just one example, right? Mandatory minimum sentences do the same thing. The bail system does the same thing. These are ways in which the mass incarceration system is literally pulling people into it, regardless of guilt or innocence, regardless of the presumption of innocence, and then, labeling them, right, as felons, labeling them as prisoners, labeling them as people to be judged harshly, as if these structures don't exist. And so I think it's really important for everyone to understand, right, how these incentives operate, right? For my clients who are innocent, but really for everyone in the system, because it is labeling people in a way that acts as if, right, these incentives don't exist, right? And by pushing people into the system, even innocent people in the system, into the system, right, we are driving sort of mass incarceration. The system is built to suck people into it, regardless of guilt or innocence, and then tag them, label them, and burden them, for years after release.
Yeah. Yeah. Brittany, I want to come to you because I want to talk about Girls Embracing Mothers. I want to talk about why you created that organization and really, what you would say about the resources that are available for families, and if you think that there is enough attention on the issue of women and mass incarceration.
There is absolutely not enough attention on the issue of women and mass incarceration. Women are among the fastest growing incarcerated population. In fact, the number of women in prison has increased over 700% since the 80s. And in Texas, where I live, this state incarcerates more women by sheer number than any other state in the country. And nearly 80% of those women are mothers. There's a huge gap in resources as it relates to children with incarcerated parents. I started Girls Embracing Mothers 9 years ago after experiencing the incarceration of my own mom. And through Girls Embracing Mothers, we work to empower women and girls who've been impacted by the justice system. One of our core programs is in a partnership with Texas Women's Prisons, where for almost 9 years now, we take a group of girls from across Texas to visit their mothers in prison. We get 4 hours to visit with the moms instead of the normal 2. That is allowed. We do art therapy. We get to bring in lunch, eat food with the moms, but we also cover a curriculum that revolves around critical life issues. We're working to break the cycle and build the bond. Through Girls Embracing Mothers, I just want to show women and girls who've been impacted by the system that the cycle, which often accompanies incarceration, can be broken. My mother and I are living proof, and we want to work to ensure that women and girls who are directly impacted are at the center of any movement, of any work surrounding them. We work to amplify their voices so that their stories are told. I think the human element is often ignored, but is necessary to drive impactful change. And that is the core of my work, to humanize this issue, to provide heartbeats to this issue, but also to be able to amplify the stories and the voices of people directly impacted, and so they can be the ones leading the way and driving that change that we all need, and through my work, I have helped get a lot of people out of prison. I have the organizations for girls and their mothers, and I realized that some of the most brilliant people I've ever met in my life have been my clients, and we cannot keep rescuing people from prison and restoring them to poverty. And so what we're doing through Buried Alive, through Girls Embracing Mothers, I'm holding this vision of sustainable liberation. How do we create sustainable liberation for people so that they have access to resources and capital to thrive and not just survive?
Yeah, because that liberation is not real if they are not able to do that, right? That's a different kind of incarceration. Sharonda, I want to come to you because I want to ask you about from both your own experience and your work with Buried Alive, what you're hearing from families about what they need now, not just in the pandemic, but really, to get families to a new normal, families who are trying to support their incarcerated loved ones. What are their frustrations? What needs to change?
I want to go back to what you said earlier as well before I hit that. My survival was those 10 minutes a day, but my true survival was knowing that I had someone on the outside fighting for me. Because before Brittany sent me that letter, I was in a dark place. When you don't have anybody fighting for you on the outside, and if you in prison 10 years, a lot of time your parents are dead, family members have started decreasing, friends are gone. So just to know that you have someone that's fighting for you or saying your name on the outside, that was a big, huge burden lifted off my chest. I couldn't do nothing but thank God. But right now, what needs to happen is the connection. It's all about the connection, because you're at the bottom when you're in prison. I had a 7-count indictment one count conspiracy guilty. What happened to the other 6 counts? I had never been in trouble in my life, so I had no idea what I was facing. And I just felt like the time did not fit the crime for sure. The rest of my life in prison, and I never even been in jail for a ticket, never even had a ticket. Like the connection that I needed, it goes beyond just, oh, just throw it in prison. You need to know why. You need to know what happened to me, why I made the bad choice that I have. So today, when I'm around people and they talking or conversating and they make a bad decision, I have to understand, I dig deeper, like what led them to that decision. Like, I wasn't a bad person. I did not deserve to die in prison. And I was so grateful and so thankful that I had Brittany, but we need more Brittany's. We need more Brittany's to tackle more cases. We need more people to just embrace. When I know somebody's getting out of prison right now, I'm the first to go try to get them a bag ready, try to get them the tools that they need to survive, or try to get them a job. Let's do this together, because I understand I had a support system when I got out, but most people don't have that support. We have to support each other in and out the system.
Yeah. And what would you say, what would you add to your thoughts on if there is enough attention placed on women and their situation in the mass incarceration issue?
We need we need all the attention, really, because we are mothers. We are the support of the core. And when the kids are gone, like when I do the Girls Embracing trip with Brittany, I see that bond. Like, I wish it had been Girls Embracing Mother when my daughter was coming up, because everybody in the room have a common somewhere someone is incarcerated, so they understand each other. Whereas my daughter had to keep quiet. The system needs to know that the mothers actually need to be out. If it was up to me, I just release everybody, every mother that's in.
Yeah. Well, before we get out of here, this has been such a robust conversation. I just want to ask everybody for a final thought for our audience as we wrap this up today. What do you want folks to leave here thinking about around the issue of mass incarceration and families? I'll start with you, Sylvia.
I'll say that, and this is something I feel like I'm always thinking, is that society tends to sympathize with the nonviolent offenders and the wrongfully convicted and those serving unthinkable sentences for drug crimes. And I think that they should, right? Because those injustices are emblematic of what's really wrong with our system, right? It really shows the brokenness of our system. But I think that we can't stop there. And I think that's what happens a lot, is that we have to think about, the more than 50% of our current state prison population is incarcerated for a serious or violent crime. So I think that if we don't think about what's happening to this part of our system, if we're not thinking about, legislation that's going to impact them as well, then we're not going to be able to do away with the mass incarceration, right? We can make a dent and we can start to do the work, but I think we really, as a society, need to start thinking about people that are convicted of murder, that are convicted of crimes that, we perceive as heinous. We need to figure out what happened, why did this happen, what kind of services do they need, and is 50 years really what is going to make a change, right? So I think that one of the things I'm really excited about is the second look legislation that is, coming up. We have something in Seattle, California, Washington, D.C., and it's sort of giving judges the opportunity to go back and look at the sentences, right? So we're able to reevaluate these sentences. We have, a lot of progressive district attorneys across the country saying, hey, I want to go back and look at this 25-year-old that was sentenced to, 80 years for a murder conviction. And I think that a part of my work is really showing that even people convicted of really serious and even violent crimes are people that also should be considered for redemption and rehabilitation. And we need to create a system in which that can happen. Like if we're thinking about what happens before, yeah, prevention is better than cure, but we're thinking about right now in this moment, we have to look at the more than 50% of our current state prison population that is being held for serious offenses. I think that we have to look at those people. We have to think about legislative reform for that demographic. So yeah.
Christina, final thoughts?
I'm going to piggyback on what Sylvia just said and say that absolutely, I need people in the public to recognize that the innocents in the system are absolutely the canaries in the coal mine, right? They really do shine a light on the broader problems in the system. You can't just say, I am concerned about the innocent people who are wrongfully convicted in this country. You know, that because the things that the innocent people have experienced are also experienced by so many more, right? The injustices faced by the people who are wrongly convicted are equally faced by those who are serving sentences for crimes they may have committed. So it's really important for us to recognize that the innocence cases and the wrongful conviction cases are shining a light on so many broken processes in the system, and that it really emphasizes the need for overall reform of the criminal legal system.
Brittany, your final thought?
I would have people to understand that it's not just about releasing people from prison, but what are we releasing them into? And to really understand that there is a lot of genius behind bars, a lot of human ingenuity that this nation needs to thrive. And so to be able to look at that and just imagine the possibilities of what directly impacted people could be doing if they were in positions to simply flourish, and to understand what that means to help harness their entrepreneurship and that genius in a way that can truly help America as a whole. I really want us to start reimagining what justice looks like overall.
Yeah. And Sharonda, the last word goes to you.
And justice can be, to me, anything. It starts within the mind. Like even before Brittany was on my case, I was taking all the programs I could just in case. And I didn't have a just in case before then. So I was regrouping my mind, even with a life sentence, to say, if they let me out today, I could get a job in this area. I could get a job in this field. Like I didn't just sit there. That's why when she said second look, most of them need a second look. Like we all need a second look sometime. It's just the things that we're doing out here. But in the inside, you have so many people that's trying so hard. Like you just don't know the level of understanding of all that you can do in a prison to get yourself ready. And like Brittany just said, be ready to receive those people with something when they come out. Just don't leave them hanging because they don't know what to do or they have no guidance. Like putting me on a city bus, and I had never been on a city bus, was crazy to me. However, I found some 13-year-olds that guided me all the way, without misleading me, but just getting people ready in the inside and outside would be my final on that.
Well, I think that is a good note to end on. I want to thank all of you so much for this really important conversation. Thank you for sharing your stories, sharing your lived experience with us. And thank you for making this conversation such a wonderful one that hopefully leads to some solutions and some action going forward. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And now I'm excited to introduce 2 artist grantees with Array's Law Enforcement Accountability Project, whose art projects help to elevate storytelling around police brutality and murder. First, we have Jocelyn Jackson, the co-founder of People's Kitchen Collective in Oakland and the founder of Justice Kitchen. Today, Jocelyn will show us how to make a hibiscus and chia cooler. And poet and director W.J. Lofton will follow. W.J. is author of the poetry book, A Garden for Black Boys, Between the Stages of Soil and Stardust. He will read from his poem, inspired by the murder of Breonna Taylor, Would You Kill God Too? Jocelyn, let's make that drink.
Hello, my name is Jocelyn Jackson. I am one of the LEAP Fellows, the Law Enforcement Accountability Project that was begun by Ava DuVernay at Array, now Foundation. And it's important for me to be able to be present for this experience today because our projects are tasked with this very specific and sacred duty of bringing accountability and justice into the stories and the lives that were taken by police violence. Specifically for my project, I honored the story of Philando Castile, who was murdered by Yaramo Gañanez in 2016. It is 5 years ago, July, that this happened. And it is absolutely a heartbreaking anniversary, but one that needs to be named and honored and lifted up because accountability is lifelong. This experience of losing a life is never one-sided. So these projects under the LEAP umbrella call on us to talk about this relationship between two people that ends with one person's life being taken. I felt especially drawn to Philando Castile because he was a cafeteria worker. He worked in the cafeteria for over a decade, feeding young children in schools. And it feels important to name that profession, along with this profession that we have in our society of police officer, these are ideally ways to protect and serve our community. They're ways to caretake. Why is it that one person who had that directive took the life of another? And in this particular project that I did, it's called Fixed Price Menu. And it is a tablescape and a conceptual menu that I put together to honor this moment where we can say, what is it to imagine a different outcome? What is it to create an experience that honors that this is possible, that we can live into growing a society where death isn't an outcome, where we can be in relationship with one another to create a different place for us to reside in our society together. So I want to talk to you about Fixed Price Menu, which was an ephemeral thing that lasted only one afternoon. It was a table set for two. And the table that was set had food that was recognized from Philando's mother as being his favorite food, but it was only served on one side of the table. Because we wanted to acknowledge that the food that we can have, whether it is the teff crackers and the black bean dip, is it the cornbread with the steak stew, is it the beet cupcake that was for dessert? Each of those things had a story to tell about this exchange, about this brutal violence that could be absolutely different in its outcome if all of us come to this experience and really interact with the possibilities of what it is to embrace life. So I really want to make sure that there is an opportunity for me to say that I really have a deep belief in food being a real catalyst for change, a real catalyst for social change. Because with every plate that is served, there is a story there. What I'm going to share with you today is the first part of this menu, which is a chia and hibiscus drink. It is something that I selected for several reasons. One is that hibiscus, many of you know as dabdina, as jamaica. It's an ingredient that is so present in so many different cultures. I have the chia seed that goes into that, and the chia seed is a really crucial piece of this experience because it really tells a story of potential. It tells a story of what it is for us as human beings to really look at every piece of what we make for ourselves and to see what is possible to grow from each of those experiences. I want to share with you that there is a possibility of creating something delicious and beautiful from these ingredients that can honor a story that is tragic. That's important for this menu to be loaded with both things, to be possible, to be a real recognition of the lives that were lived as well as the lives that were taken. That's at the heart of what it is to be in this tablescape. I've already steeped this hibiscus, and that's what you'll do is take the hibiscus and place it in warm water and steep it so that you get a really rich, red, and luscious drink here. And we have this opportunity to really say, you know, these are these leaves that were dehydrated for us to be able to use in a different way. So how can we do that? And this drink is one of those ways that we can do it. We have the ingredients here that you can see, the hibiscus. We have the chia seed that requires just a teaspoon. And we stir that in as well as our maple syrup. And you do that maple syrup to taste, but also the maple syrup is meaningful. This tartness of the hibiscus is tempered by the sweetness of the molasses. Excuse me, not the molasses, but the maple. And there's an opportunity for us to choose the ways that we can adjust how we perceive the things that we take into our bodies. It's a similar message from the whole table. And we're going to go ahead and completely top this off so that the glass is totally full. And what is also really beautiful about the chia is that it will expand. It is gelatinous. It has the opportunity to interact with the water and have a chemical reaction that makes it even more nutritious to our bodies. It tells a story in the way that it interacts with the elements. And that feels like an important piece of how we interact with these opportunities to be in a place of sharing a meal and telling its story, that we see all the different changes along the way. We see how we can be impressive and really powerful part of creating transformation. That's what food and cooking is about. We are so powerful in that exchange, and also the need to be humble. And my project, Fixed Price Menu, was an attempt at that. It was an attempt to really be present to this story, to this opportunity for accountability and justice, to be part of the way that we interact with this menu and with this story generally, because it really is an important piece of the way that we can be here for one another. We can create this recipe together. We can tell the story of Philando Castile and Yeramo Yanez, and we can imagine a different outcome together. So that will be our future, as opposed to repeating this tragic and violent past. I really wish for us to do that together. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Would you kill God too? For Breonna Taylor. Some women will not arrive in the springtime to lay in the bluegrass of Kentucky. One will die in the arms of her lover, inside the hallway of their home, and he will look desperately for mercy to show up unannounced, as the bullets did just minutes before. The hell-hot metal shot into the Walls' scalp until it coughed gypsum. In 400 years, you never have knocked before entering, never entered without leaving a breath undone, or a body taken, bending brief and begging for a better way to die. We bury our babies as you polish your badges, break batons over our beloveds' backs, officers, Cosgrove, Mattingly, Hankinson. How many nights have you hid the stench of homicide? Tucked it in the farthest pockets of your dreams. How do you explain this to your children? Did you tell them the blood on your shoes belonged to a Black girl? Or is she not worth mentioning? Did you make a mirror out of her blood? Did you stand in it? God was in the room when you made a massacre out of someone's child. How long? Does a man daydream about murder before his index finger finds the small metal body of a gun? Did the clouds resemble smoke on March 13th? What does a sky before a murder look like? Officers, did you see the sunset? Was God standing at the horizon? Did you want to reach out and kill her too? Would you kill God too? Was heaven too far away or your legs just too short? Some women will not arrive in the springtime to lay in the bluegrass of Kentucky. Some will survive to swing the steel of a switchblade, to warn your necks. No dying happens tonight. No prisoners will be taken. Thank you.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Jocelyn and WJ. And a special thank you to our sponsor, the Just Trust, for making this event possible. We hope you'll join us next month for our next Live with the 19th event, where we take a look at how new leaders are reimagining small business. If you want to be among the first to hear details about our events, sign up now for our free newsletter at 19thnews.org/subscribe. And a final thanks to the more than 10,000 members that support our nonprofit newsroom, because it's your contributions that make conversation like today's possible. If you're not a member yet, you can still show your support today by donating at 19thnews.org/membership. We look forward to welcoming you to the 19th family, and we'll see you at our next event.